Well, hey friend, Andrew here. Today we're going to talk about microphones, so let's roll the intro. Well, welcome into the control room of my home studio. Before we start talking about microphones, I'd like to give you something free just for watching this video today. So as I was thinking about the topic of microphones, I remember starting out my studio and not knowing what microphone to purchase. So I decided to put together a home studio microphone guide. So if you head over to www.andrewpeachmusic.com/microphone guide, you can grab a copy of that guide. Some of the stuff that we talk about today is in there, as well as applications and suggestions for different types of microphones in the home studio. So there's a bunch of information in there. I wish I had that when I started, and that's there for you to grab. So while you're there, you can check out my latest online course, Constructing a Home Recording Studio. So that course outlines the process that I took to build both this studio and the previous studio that we owned. I took a bunch of photos and videos during the build process, and you can see the different materials I use, and I explain why I chose those materials, how I set up my lighting, how I set up my power, all that good stuff. So if you head over to www.andrewpeachmusic.com/constructing a studio, you can check that out for yourself. So just to give you an idea of the transformation that occurred in the current studio that I'm in, you can see the tracking room used to look like this, and now it looks like this. And the control room, which we're in right now, looked like this, and now it looks like this. So I've been able to construct my dream studio, and I'm hoping through that course resource that I'll be able to help you reach your dream studio as well. So the topic of today is microphones, so let's dive in and take a look. Alright, you can see in the picture there are 5 microphones. Those are the microphones that I use in my home studio. We'll talk about that later, but first we're going to talk about the different characteristics of microphones. There are 3 types of microphones: dynamic, condenser, and ribbon. Condenser mics have different diaphragm sizes, so small, medium, and large. And then we're going to talk about polar patterns, so directivity, pickup patterns, and that type thing. So the first microphone type is called dynamic. So this is probably the most common of the 3 types, especially used in live situations, but they are used in the studio as well, for sure. These microphones capture sound via a moving magnetic coil, so they do not capture the same amount of detail as condensers or ribbons, which we'll discuss shortly. But because of the fact that they have a magnetic coil in them, they can handle much higher sound pressure levels, much more volume than the condenser or ribbon mics can. So that's really helpful, again, for live situations where you got a lot of stage noise. These microphones can handle the higher volume than what the other mics can. These mics are also built very well. They can handle being, thrown around on stage or in your studio. And they're generally good at keeping feedback in check, which is also helpful for live situations. An example of a dynamic microphone, as you can see there, is a Shure SM58, which we'll talk about shortly. The next type of microphone is a condenser. So condensers are very popular for recording situations. They're very precise as they operate electrically through a process called capacitance. And I'm not going to get into the details of that right now, but because they operate electrically, they require external phantom power. So your interface or your mixer needs to provide external power to the microphone in order for it to work. Okay? Not all condensers have the same sound, so you can line up 6 different condensers and they can all capture the sound source differently, which is interesting. Some of these condenser microphones feature built-in switches that allow you to shape the sound. And these mics are much more fragile than dynamic microphones, so handle them with care. So an example of a condenser microphone is the AudioTechnica AT4040, which is what I'm using right now to talk to you. So we'll talk about that again shortly. The last type of microphones that we're going to talk about here are ribbon microphones. So they're no longer as popular as dynamics or condensers. They used to be really popular in radio. Like everything, they're making a little bit of a comeback lately, but These mics need a strong preamp to work, and they're very, very fragile. And because of that, they're typically much more expensive than the other two types. So you can see there an example in the pictures, the Royer R121. I've never actually used one of these microphones. They're usually over $1,500 or more. So that's out of the price for my home studio. But it is an option out there if that's something you want to consider. Next, we're going to talk about diaphragm sizes. So the first size we're going to talk about is a small diaphragm microphone. So these are commonly called pencil mics. They have a small cylindrical shape. They can handle higher sound pressure levels compared to the other diaphragm sizes and are small and easy to place. Compared to the large and medium diaphragms, smalls have an increased internal noise and a lower sensitivity. And this is due to the stiffer diaphragm, right? So obviously the smaller the diaphragm, the stiffer it's going to be. So that's the case for these microphones. So these mics are used for drum overheads, cymbals, hi-hats, acoustic guitars, that type thing is where you normally would find these. And an example of a small diaphragm size is the CAD C9 pencil condenser, which you can see there in the picture. The next diaphragm size we're going to talk about are large diaphragm microphones. So as the diaphragm increases in size, more air movements are captured. Larger diaphragms also move easier, detecting even slight differences. So obviously the bigger surface area of the large diaphragm, the more air movements it's going to capture, the more detail it's going to get, and it can get even the slightest differences in sound pressure levels. As I said, this leads to an increase in sonic detail. But the thing with these microphones is be sure to keep the volume in check, as the mic will distort at high sound pressure levels. Right, so you think about it, the higher the sound pressure level gets, the more it's going to vibrate, the more issues you might have with keeping volume in check. So where are these microphones used? Well, these mics are used for drums, guitars, amps, vocals, pretty much anything in your home studio. They're great. And you can see there an example is the Neumann TLM 102 large condenser microphone. Finally, the last diaphragm size we're going to talk about are medium or hybrid diaphragm sizes. So these mics combine the qualities of small and large diaphragms, or somewhere in the middle, obviously, hence the name. They have a fuller warm sound compared to small diaphragms, and they have a bigger range compared to large diaphragms. These mics are slowly gaining popularity, but they're generally not needed if you already have a small and large diaphragm microphone at your disposal. Right, so they're somewhere in the middle. Well, you can either use a large or use a small, depending on what you have in your microphone arsenal. As you can see there, an example of a medium or hybrid diaphragm size is the AudioTechnica AT4040. Now we're going to shift to polar patterns. So polar patterns are how the microphone sees the sound or picks up the sound and rejects the sound. So we'll talk about that a little more shortly. The first polar pattern is a cardioid polar patterns. You can see there in the diagram, that's what the polar pattern diagram looks like. So cardioids are the most common pickup pattern. They capture everything in front of the microphone and reject everything else. So if you look at the diagram there, the front of the microphone is at the 0 degree mark. So you can see that in front it's capturing everything, but at the 180 degree mark at the back of the microphone, it's primarily rejecting everything. So that's a helpful tip when you're placing microphones, no matter what type. Have a look at the polar pattern and not only point your mic at the sound source, but use the back of the mic to your advantage to reject any sound that you don't want to have. And an example for that on drums is if you're close miking your snare or your tom, you want the front of the microphone facing the sound source, which is the drum itself. But if you can position the microphone in a way that the back of the mic faces the cymbal that's nearby, then you're going to get a whole bunch of rejection of the cymbal sound from going into that microphone. So that's a little helpful tip there, which we'll talk about in later videos, but that's a key thing when you're using microphones. Look at where it listens, look at where it rejects, and use that to your advantage. So cardioid microphones are ideal for live performances as they help reduce feedback, right? Hence the rejection in the back. So as I said, they focus on the sound source and reject everything else. And these mics are used for single sound sources such as drums, vocals, amps, etc. So point it at what the sound source is, use the back of the mic to your advantage to reject anything you don't want, and away you go. The next type of polar pattern are super and hypercardioids. So these are very similar to cardioids, but they have a smaller front area of sensitivity. They pick up a small amount of sound in the back of the mic. So you can see on these, they're a little bit more squashed in the front, and they got a little lobe on the back. As a result of this, they have slightly improved isolation and a higher resistance to feedback because the front is more focused. These mics are commonly used for untreated recording rooms and noisy situations such as stages. These mics are a little more focused compared to cardioids, and they also have the lobe at the back, which the cardioid don't have. So you're not going to get as much rejection. And the difference between the super and hypercardioid is the size of the rear pickup area. So if you look at the two lobes at the 180-degree mark on the supercardioid compared to the hypercardioid is much larger than the supercardioid. The next polar pattern we're going to talk about are omnidirectional polar patterns. So these mics pick up sound equally from all directions. So you can see the dark line going around the outside there. It doesn't matter where the sound is coming from, it's going to pick up all directions. So these microphones are good for picking up everything in a quiet room, but obviously it's going to feed back in noisy venues because there's no rejection through the microphone. It just picks everything up. So these mics are commonly used for a circle of singers, which makes sense, or string instruments in a circle. That type thing, because it gets everything from all directions. The next polar pattern are figure 8. So these mics pick up sound equally from the front and the back, which you can see in the image there. And they reject sounds coming from the sides. This pattern is common for ribbon mics, and they're commonly used for duets, so either vocals or instruments. So if you got two vocals, one on either side of the mic, you're going to pick that up great, and then it's going to reject stuff off to the side, or the same thing when you're recording instruments. The last polar pattern we're going to talk about is a shotgun polar pattern. So these mics are very directional, which you can see by the picture there. There's a big narrow lobe at the front, smaller one at the back, and then again two smaller ones on the sides. They pick up sounds that are some distance away and with a high degree of focus. This allows the mic to reject sound sources other than those it's pointing at. And where you see these mics most commonly are in film, TV, theater, and video shooting, but they may also be used for groups of singers and drum cymbals sometimes. So where I've seen these microphones commonly used are on top of a DSLR camera for video shooting, and I've also seen them used in live venues for crowd mics. So the microphones are actually on the stage pointing out into the crowd. Obviously you wanted to reject as much sound as possible from the stage, and you just want to get the crowd, so that's why these microphones are used. So that's a little bit of theory on microphones, which hopefully is helpful when you're trying to choose which microphone to use for a particular application. But what microphones do I use in my home studio? So the first microphone I use is an SM58. You can see the polar patterns there taken from the website, so they actually got the polar pattern shown for different frequencies, which is interesting. You can see it's a cardioid microphone generally, but at some frequencies it acts kind of different. And then you can see, we didn't discuss this, but this is a frequency response graph. So you can see how the microphones work at different frequencies. So that's always helpful when you're looking at what sound you're trying to capture. If you're trying to capture a kick drum, with this microphone, you can see after 100 hertz it drops off. So it's probably not the best one to use for that. So that's how I would use that diagram. I have 5 of these microphones, and I currently use them for talkback, close miking, instruments, and live recordings in my studio. These are great microphones. They're workhorses. These are the first microphones I bought when I started my studio. And like I said, you can see I have 5 of them, so they're quite useful. The next type of microphone is an SM57 by Shure. So you can see there again the polar pattern is pretty similar to the SM58. The SM58 is used more in vocal applications, whereas the SM57 is used more in instrument applications. And you can see on the frequency response graph there, it drops off at about 2000 hertz, which is different from the SM58, which drops off at 100. So I have 3 of these microphones, and I currently use them for my snare top and bottom, and from close miking my guitar amps. The next type of microphone is a Shure SM7B. So here's the polar pattern and the frequency response for that microphone. So you can see it's definitely a cardioid microphone based on the polar patterns they're shown for the different frequencies. And then you see on the frequency response graph there's a dashed line or 2 dashed lines. So this microphone has switches built in, and you can shape the frequency response depending on your needs. You can have a low roll off or a high boost, as you can see there. So whatever application you're using, if you want to capture more highs, you can flip the switch. Or if you want to reject some of the lows, again, you can flip the other switch, and you can end up with a curve shown there. So I have 2 of these microphones, and this is a recent upgrade. These are like the standard for live recordings and even in studios and stuff. So all the Michael Jackson vocals for one of his albums was recorded on a Shure SM7B back in the day. And these microphones are used primarily for vocals, at least that's what I use them for, but they are a dynamic microphone, so you can use them for other applications as well. The next microphone I'm going to talk about is the AudioTechnica AT4040. So you can see the frequency response graph there, and the polar pattern shown. So the polar pattern on this one is flipped. You can see the different frequencies. So in low frequencies it acts as a cardioid, and then in higher frequencies it acts as like a super or hypercardioid. You can see by the polar pattern. And then there's a roll-off switch on this microphone with the dashed line there on the left side of the frequency response graph, so you can roll off some lows if you wish. So this is the only large condenser microphone that I own. So when I started my studio a few years ago, this is the first microphone that I bought. And I currently use these for vocals, acoustic guitar, and video shooting as I'm talking to you right now. Special mention microphone, so the Sennheiser E835. And you can see the different frequencies. Their chart is a little different, and they show a lot more frequencies than the other charts do. And then there's your frequency response graph. So we use these microphones at church for lead vocals. They're very similar to the SM58. And I borrowed one from the church for the shootout video that I'm going to do next week. So the cat's out of the bag. Next week we're going to do a vocal shootout video with all the different microphones that I talked about. So for me, I just want to compare the Sennheiser E835 and the SM58 seem to be industry standards for microphones. And we've had some feedback issues at church, so I just want to compare the two and see how they sound on my vocals. So what better way to do it than bring it to my studio and do a shootout. So some final points. So in the next video, as I said, I'm going to do a shootout of all the microphones that I use in my studio. That'll be fun. I'm going to cover drum, amp, acoustic miking techniques in a future video. So right now we're just talking primarily about vocals, especially when it comes to the shootout video. And as I mentioned earlier, check out my home studio microphone guide for more detail on the topics we talked about here today. The different applications for microphones. We'll get into more specifics than what I covered here. And I actually give you some microphone suggestions by application and price level. So that's not something I did here, but I do give you some suggestions for mics commonly used in the studio. So hopefully that's helpful. So if you head over to www.andrewpeachmusic.com/microphone guide, you can grab a copy of that guide for yourself. So that's my spiel about home studio microphones. You can see the 5 microphones there in the picture that we talked about. So let's head back to the control room for a wrap-up. Well, I hope that microphone overview and talking through the different microphones that I use in my home studio was helpful to you. If there's something else I can help you with along your musical journey, just post them in the comments below. I read every one and I respond to as many as I can. If you haven't already, subscribe below. We got lots of exciting content upcoming, including our microphone shootout next week. In the description below, there are links to my microphone guide, my online course, as well as my 2021 studio tour, so be sure to check those out. Well, that's all I have for this week. Hopefully you have a good week, and we'll see you in the next one.